Hi everyone, welcome to English 247 at GCC. And my name is Lillian Ruiz. I'm the instructor for the course. So what I wanted to do today was just give you a sense of how our online class will be structured and talk a little bit about what will be coming up over the course of the semester. And then basically next class we can begin with starting some of the course material. So if you are familiar with Moodle, and my suspicion is if you are watching this video, you will see that at the top of the Moodle, I've got several folders for you to see how the class is organized. The first is entitled Syllabus and Other Documents. And if you were to open that, you will see our syllabus, our course outline, and any of the handouts that I would have been distributing if we were having this class face-to-face. You'll see that when you open that if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you will see attachments, PDFs that you can open and print, which I always suggest you do. I like having hard copies of things. In the event that you can't open the attachments, I have also included the text in the space above the actual documents, so that if you wanted to, you could read it that way as well. That's what I'm going to be spending the bulk of today's class discussing, the syllabus and the course outline. There also is, at the top of our Moodle page, underneath that, a list of due dates for assignments. And you will find these same due dates in our course outline, which I will be reviewing shortly. But if you wanted to see them all in one place, you can do that. And there is also a folder for past class sessions. What I'm going to be doing on our Moodle site is just to have each week available, that particular week that we happen to be on, available for you to see on Moodle. But you can access the previous weeks by going on past class sessions. So you can always access the semester as a whole, but the current week will be the week that is visible on our Moodle site. And then you can see that I also have a folder for a discussion forum. This is basically the way that we will be interacting in class. If we were face-to-face, then obviously we would be interacting in person. Instead, what I'm going to be doing is posting questions on the discussion forum. I'll talk about that in a few moments for you to respond to. That would count as your class participation, or in effect, your attendance for that particular class. Because what I try to do with my online classes is to duplicate as much as possible what I would be doing in my face-to-face classes. So if we were meeting face-to-face, we would be meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. So you can sort of think about this class as meeting Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. because every Tuesday and Thursday by 9 a.m. I will post a class video, much like this one, that will talk about the content that I normally would have discussed if we were meeting face-to-face. And then what I will do is post a question for you to answer on our class discussion forum. That would count as the interaction that we would have in class if we were discussing that question live. So I'm going to try to post these videos a little bit before Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m., but you can count that on Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m., unless there's some sort of an emergency in my life, you can watch the class video. You have 48 hours to watch that particular video and to answer the corresponding attendance question. And if it turns out that you needed more time, no worries. You can always ask me for an extension and I would grant it to you. But my hope is that, again, if we are regularly meeting, so to speak, twice a week, then that'll give you a sense of direction, because if you've never taken a summer class before, they are very condensed. We're doing in about 7 to 8 weeks what we would normally do in 16 weeks. So it's pretty intense. And I'll be talking about the specifics of what we'll be doing in a few minutes. But I just wanted to lay that out there right from the very beginning. You'll also see, if you're looking on our Moodle site, underneath the section for our discussion forum is an optional chat. So if you ever wanted to meet with me, there are multiple ways that you could do so. One of those ways could be through a chat where we would have a prearranged time and we could interact through the chat function, but that's optional. Another way that we could interact is through Zoom, and you will see that I have a optional Zoom section at the top of our Moodle site in the event that you wanted to meet with me via Zoom. Telephone, of course, is also another option as well. And as you can see, our first week is visible, which is today, the 23rd, which is Tuesday, where our topic is just the introduction for the class itself, where I'm planning on basically reviewing the syllabus and the course outline. And for today's attendance question, and you'll always see the attendance question at the ending of that particular class, and you've got 48 hours to answer that, is to please introduce yourself to the class. Feel free to provide pictures or video or audio, but that's not required. Again, this is what we would have been doing if we were meeting live. And again, it will be the current week that is visible to you on our Moodle site, but you can just go to the top of the Moodle site for past class sessions to access the previous weeks. So what I wanted to do now is just to review the syllabus and the course outline, give you an idea what the class is about. And I suggest, as I had said earlier, that you take a paper copy of it just so that you can readily access it. But you can see that my name is on there, Lillian Ruiz. Usually that's one of the first things I'm asked in a semester is, what should I call you? Most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal. Feel free to call me whatever you feel comfortable with. You'll see that my email is there, Ruiz, which is my surname, RUIZ, at gcc.mass.edu. Returning students know that I do not have a first initial with my surname and my email address because I've been at GCC so long, it's hard to believe, 30 years now, that when I began, we didn't have email addresses. And when email addresses were issued, they were issued just based on surname, until it was realized rather quickly that that was a poor idea because multiple people might share surnames. But if you see an email address that's just a surname, then rest assured that person has probably been at the college for quite a while. My phone number is there. That'll get you to the phone to my office, which I will be checking regularly if you were to leave a message, 775-1236. But email is probably an easier way to get in touch with me. My office happens to be North 328A in the Inclusion Diversity Center, which I encourage you to visit if you haven't already done so. It's a dedicated space for students who support the issues of inclusion and diversity. There's a small kitchenette there. There is a computer there. And there also is a relaxation space, I guess we could call it, a area where you could play games and where you could study if you so wanted to, a common room, if you will. And the kitchenette often at times has snacks available as well for students. I suspect that probably most of us won't be on campus in the summer because we are taking this class online. But nevertheless, I still wanted to let you know of its availability. The textbooks for this class, and you might have noticed that I have them listed as recommended books in the GCC library or in the GCC bookstore, because you can access these texts in lots of different places and it doesn't matter which edition you happen to use. Certainly your page numbers would be different, but nevertheless, if you wanted to, let's say, take out these texts from the library, you could do so. If you wanted to purchase these texts secondhand, let's say on an online site such as Amazon, you could do so as well. Whenever I am able to find working links for these texts, I will provide them to you so that you can access them free online if you so like. Thus far, it looks like I've been able to access everything that I have assigned for the class, though I'm always a little bit skeptical with the internet that something might be taken down. But I just tested all of these links this morning for all of the works that we will be doing, and they all are active links online. So the first, and I ordered Signet Classic books because they are paperback and they're usually affordable, but again, you can use whatever edition you'd like, is by Kate Chopin. It's entitled The Awakening and Selected Short Stories. So what we are going to read is one of the short stories in that text. It's entitled The Story of an Hour. And we are going to read what's known as her novella, which means that it's longer than a short story, but it is not as long as a novel, called The Awakening. So we won't be reading that book in its entirety, but that book happens to have both of those texts available within them. Emily Dickinson. And the definitive Emily Dickinson version is known as Final Harvest with her poetry, edited by Johnson. And that said, you can find lots of Emily Dickinson texts. We'll talk a little bit about why Johnson is the preferred editor when we get to that point in the semester. But nevertheless, what we are going to be doing with Dickinson is just reading one poem, a poem of your choice. So you can buy an edition of Dickinson and look through it and choose a poem. I'll also be providing a link for multiple Emily Dickinson poems so that you can choose a poem when the time comes. Basically, what you want to know at this point about Dickinson is that her poetry was published after her death, and editors actually make corrections to her poetry, which is something that you never do with poetry. And it was only until the editor Johnson released her poetry in the way that she wrote it that her poetry really became of interest to literary scholars. And the quick, down and dirty way to figure out if you were reading what Emily Dickinson originally wrote as opposed to what an editor might have, quote, corrected, unquote, is that Emily Dickinson wrote her poetry with many, many dashes in places that would oftentimes have commas. So just look at the ending of the lines. If you see lots of dashes and you see lots of capitalizations for words that oftentimes aren't capitalized or vice versa, then you probably know that you're looking at a Dickinson poem. Then we will be reading Frankenstein. That happens to be one of the first texts we'll be reading this semester. Again, I had ordered a Signet Classic, but you can use whatever edition you'd like. We'll also be reading Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And again, I had ordered a Signet Classic, but you can use whatever edition you'd like. We will be reading Jane Eyre, and that is the longest text of the semester. It will occur about halfway through the semester. And again, I ordered a Signet Classic for that. And also reading something by Jane Austen, Persuasion. Maybe not her best known work, but one of the reasons why I want us to read Persuasion is because we get insight into class as well as gender by reading that particular text. And I've got a note there that it's assumed that you'll have a good dictionary at the source for reference. And my assumption is that you've got accessibility online to both of those. But having accessibility and actually using something are two different things. So certainly I encourage all writers to use dictionaries, not just for spelling, but also for definitions, as well as the sources for synonyms, words with similar meanings in your writing, so that you can develop your writing. So for the course description, again, I'm reading from the first page of the syllabus. This is from the course catalog, that this class is a study of works by women writers through the 19th century. And students discuss literature in various genres within the historical and social context of the time in relation to early literary movements and from the perspective of a unique female literary tradition. There is a prerequisite for this class, what we call a GCC Comp 2, that you've taken either English 112, 114, or 116, or something comparable in another institution. In other words, you've already taken an introduction to literature class, so you already have an understanding of how to read literature and how to write about literature. So this is a more focused examination of a particular kind of literature, a time period, we're in the 19th century, and specifically female voices of the 19th century. So student learning outcomes, and these are the goals for the semester: to read, critically examine, and appreciate the literary voices of British and American women in the 19th century. Obviously, there were women writing in other locales as well, but we are focusing on Britain and the United States, the Western tradition, in other words. To examine major themes and issues in 19th century's women's literature, you'll begin to see some repetition. To see the relationship between 19th century women's literature and our present day world, which is true of all great literature, that it should be addressing timeless and universal themes. And lastly, and I put this on all of my syllabi, and I teach a wide range of classes, not just English classes, but I also teach personal communication skills classes. I teach media and popular culture classes. I even teach a class in horror film. So I have some pretty eclectic tastes. To improve oral and written communication skills. The idea is that we all have them, but we want to try to develop them further. So English 247, our class, offers a general introduction to the content and techniques of 19th century women's literature. Representative literary works will be studied. Obviously, we can't read everything, but this is the same class that I would be offering in a fall or a spring semester, so there is no difference in terms of the workload. This course emphasizes critical thinking, critical reading, and critical writing, oftentimes buzzwords used in education, not as in thinking negative thoughts about someone or something, not that kind of critical, but analyzing and interpreting and asking questions. Or what I oftentimes say that toddlers do very well, they ask the question why. And perhaps that's the distinction between high school, where you learn what, and college, where you begin to try to grapple with the whys. So perhaps it's not so much something that we need to learn as perhaps remind ourselves of that we did quite naturally when we were younger. And as a class, we will strive to appreciate the aesthetic and literary merits of 19th century women's literature. So procedures, as I had indicated a little bit earlier, so now I'm on the second page of the syllabus. I will post a video of myself, much like this one, discussing the class material that I would have discussed in class if we were meeting live, by the time our class would normally meet. So you can expect every Tuesday and Thursday by 9 a.m., if not earlier, there would be a class video. You have 48 hours to watch that class video and answer its corresponding attendance question in the class discussion form. And again, if you need an extension, just ask me for more time. Your answer on the discussion form is counted as your attendance for that class. So it's not evaluated as correct or incorrect. And I think of the discussion form much like the conversation we would have in an in-live class experience, that you can decide to just sort of absorb people's comments, or you can decide to actually interact. And I think both ways are very good ways to learn. So you're not required to respond to your classmates' responses. That said, you are required to read your classmates' responses and my responses in turn, because I will respond to all of you. And by reading all of that, you would get a sense of the discussion that we would have in class. So that said, if you're moved to respond to one of your classmates, just like you might be in an in-person class, to raise your hand in this instance, well, then you would just write your response in the class discussion. But again, not required. As long as you answer the class discussion question, then that's considered your attendance or your class participation. So, as I indicated in the third section under procedures, any additional interaction you have with your classmates in the discussion forum is participation, similar to your participation in live class. Some students learn best by participating, others learn best by listening, so you can decide how much or how little to participate. You should, however, read all the discussion forum responses from your classmates, and my responses in turn for optimal learning. Any of the written assignments that we have, and I'll be talking about those shortly, these include things like journals, papers, and yes, a final exam. I'm asking that you send them via PDF to my email address, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu, because that's how my grading program works best. And then what I will do is evaluate those assignments and return them to your email with my feedback. Course requirements, pretty typical. Complete all of the reading and writing assignments by the due date. There are reasons why I chose these particular dates, because the semester will be over in the blink of an eye, basically. There will be 2 out-of-class papers, formal papers that will be assigned, one about midway through the semester and one towards the ending of the semester. So we've got a little bit of time to talk about some of the works and how to write a paper. In addition to those formal papers, which I'll talk a little bit more about, you will also submit periodic journal entries discussing your reactions to each of the readings. So these are informal written responses of about a page or so, where you're talking about reactions to what we've read and discussed in class. And that will be for each of the major readings that we do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. There will also be a final exam. You shouldn't panic with that. It's open book, open notes, which is what I would have done if we were meeting live. And it will be an essay exam where I will give you a sample list of essay topics and ask you to respond to 2. And that said, you are not meeting with me on in person. If you were, we would have 2 hours for that exam. Instead, since we're meeting online, I'm going to give you 24 hours to complete that examination. And again, I don't expect you to spend 24 hours working on it. You should spend approximately 2 hours working on it. And I'll go through all of the due dates in a few minutes. And that's basically our class. So the Institutional Services Disability Statement. Greenfield Community College values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities. It's committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. So the goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. If there are any aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need reasonable academic accommodations, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And you can see that I've included the website for that as well as their phone number. So let me get back to some of the upcoming writing assignments. I had talked about the journals, these informal responses that you're doing to each of the readings. So let me read you the section on the syllabus about the journals and then talk a little bit more about them. That reading and writing is an ongoing process. So journals are meant as an opportunity for students to discuss their reactions to the reading. Guidelines will be very informal, because students should use these journals as an opportunity to explore the literature in the way they feel would be most beneficial. I will give some suggestions in class if you'd like, but on the whole, the journal should reflect any relevant thoughts or questions that you've got about the readings, and I suggest it's usually best to record these thoughts immediately after completing the reading assignment, when the ideas are still fresh. Though some students say they like to record these thoughts as they are reading, so basically this is their note-taking. Some students actually say that they prefer to listen to the class videos and their classmates' responses on discussion forums before they put together their journals, and that's fine as well. The journals provide an excellent opportunity to brainstorm and free write paper topics. And while I will be providing you with paper topics as the semester progresses, you can also create your own paper topic. I just ask that you have it approved by me ahead of time. And occasionally on the journals, you might come up with an idea that might be useful for a paper topic. And if I thought just off the top of my head that was the case, I would indicate that. But that's not to say that just because I haven't indicated that you haven't addressed something in your journal that could be used for something like a paper topic. And you can see here that you can do the same with final exam questions. Not that you have the option of choosing your final exam questions, but you never know. You might end up getting lucky in a journal addressing something that you would talk about in a final exam, or something that you could talk about in a final exam. Keep in mind that the final is open book, open notes, so you can utilize things like your journals. So I'm grading these journals informally, so I'm not grading for grammar or mechanics, just for content, and I'm evaluating them on a checkmark system. So an excellent would be a plus, a good would be a check plus, a satisfactory is a check, there even is a less than satisfactory and unsatisfactory. Um, Late journals and late work in general will lower your grade by one full grade, and no late journal will be accepted after 1 week has elapsed, unless you made other arrangements with me beforehand. So certainly if you need additional time, please let me know. So attendance, as I had indicated, that class activity and discussion is extremely important and can't be made up. So the way that I will be evaluating attendance is through a participation grade that basically is going to be your responses on the class discussion form. While each case is different, anything more than one absence or one lack of response could impact your attendance component of the grade, which I'll talk about the percentages in a moment. You don't need to notify me if you're going to be missing a particular response question, but certainly if you're missing several, then keep me up to date as to what's going on. And of course, you can consult with me by appointment, as I had indicated. So I'm thinking about those journals, these informal writing assignments of about a page or so response to each of the readings, but as long or short as it needs to be. And that would be in contrast to the papers, which you can see in the section on our syllabus about papers. These are more formal writing assignments. You'll have 2 papers over the course of the semester, one about halfway through and one towards the ending. And you can see that the information I'm included about papers are pretty general pieces of information about formatting. That all papers are due on the days specified. All papers should be typed, double-spaced, and have 1-inch borders, and the pages should be numbered. And also, you should have a cover page that lists your paper title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. And again, we'll review this a little bit more in depth when your first paper will be due. And much like late journals, late papers will lower your grade by 1 full grade. No late paper will be accepted after a week has elapsed, unless you've made other arrangements with me beforehand. And always keep a copy of anything that's important, like a journal or especially a paper. And I will distribute paper assignments throughout the term, though as I had indicated, you can create your own paper assignments as well. And you have the option of rewriting that first paper. So I see it as a learning exercise. What I will do is evaluate that paper, which should be someplace in the area of about 4 to 5 pages, but as long or as short as you think it needs to be to defend your thesis. And it'll be a critical paper, so we won't be using outside resources. And you can submit in that paper, and I will evaluate for both content as well as grammar and mechanics and give you a letter grade. If you're content with your letter grade, then you're done with that assignment. But if you wanted to improve your letter grade, you all have the option of revising that first paper based on the comments that I've given you. And if you need additional feedback, you can always ask me and I can provide that to you. And you would have the ending of the semester to submit in that revision. I would ask that you include the original with my comments along with your revised copy where you've incorporated my comments so I can compare and contrast the two. And you would get the higher of the 2 grades. And basically, I don't feel like I'm giving you any unfair advantage because this is really the way professional authors write, that they go through multiple drafts and editorial commentary. Now, your second paper is going to be due at the ending of the semester, so you wouldn't have time to revise it. But the idea is that because you've used the first paper as a learning exercise, you're just duplicating what you would do with the first paper for the second paper, just on a different text. Again, maybe 4 or 5 pages long, but as long or short as it needs to be. And you can't revise a late paper, which is more incentive to ask for an extension if you need it, because once you ask for an extension, it's no longer late. So that said, I have, upon rare occasions, had students submit in their second paper early enough so that they could basically revise it. But it's something we would have to negotiate. It isn't something that's guaranteed the way the first revision is. So I have a section on plagiarism here that I'm going to skip for now. We can talk about that next class. And basically end the syllabus by talking about grading. And you can see that these are approximate percentages of how the course is going to be structured. About 10% of your grade will be participation, which means attendance, the discussion forum responses, watching the class videos. That's basically the best way to be successful in this class, is to watch all of these class videos and to respond to all of the class discussion questions and to read your classmates' responses as well as my responses in turn. Journals, as I said, those informal writing assignments, 15% of your grade. And paper number 1, as I had indicated, about halfway through the semester, 4 to 5 pages or so, 25% of your grade. Paper number 2, very similar to paper number 1, but due at the ending of the semester on a different text, 25%. And that essay final exam, that's open book, open notes, that is 25%. So you can see that slow and steady wins the race in this instance. And an A is excellent, B is good, C is satisfactory, and yes, there are letters that follow C, but I prefer to concentrate on the first 3, especially on the first day of class. So now I'm going to move to another document, and it's entitled Course Outline. And this is also another handout that I would have distributed to you if we were meeting live in class. And it basically is the calendar for what we will be doing over the course of the semester in its entirety, with a couple of caveats that dates and assignments may be subject to change, but we will finish everything by the end. And reading should be done before the date indicated, ideally, because that's what the class videos are going to be discussing. But that said, I understand that there is a heavy reading load in this class. I encourage you to get ahead as much as possible. The good news is we're reading novels, so perhaps that's a nice fit for the summer, some novel reading. You can see that week 1 today, the 23rd, was devoted just to introduction, my basically reviewing the class as a whole. So what I would like you to have read for next class, and don't panic if you don't have the opportunity to do that. I understand that we've just begun our first semester, our first class, but certainly if you can't read it by Thursday, you want to read it shortly thereafter. It's an essay entitled The Cult of True Womanhood, which I was able to find an online link for. And also a short story by Kate Chopin, and you can see that I found an online link for this as well, but it's also it's included in the text, The Awakening, or Selected Stories by Kate Chopin. And that story is indeed short. It's only a couple of pages long or so. But The Cult of True Womanhood talks a little bit about the role of female in the 1800s. Actually, reviews some media and popular culture of the time, since I am interested in media and popular culture, women's magazines, and how women were portrayed in women's magazines. So this will give us a sense of some of the historical time period. And then we will read a short story that illustrates that time period. And in fact, not only will we read or begin the class with Kate Chopin, but we will also end the class with Kate Chopin. We begin it with a short story, The Awakening, but we'll end it with her novella. Or I'm sorry, we'll begin with her short story, The Story of an Hour, but then we will end with her novella, The Awakening. But that 1.5 page short story or so is what I will be discussing on our class video on Thursday, as well as the essay, The Cult of True Womanhood. So if at all possible, have those before you watch our class video on Thursday. Again, you would have 48 hours for which to respond to the corresponding attendance question for that video. Then you can see week 2 is devoted to Frankenstein. Basically, each week is going to be devoted to a major novel. So again, getting ahead is very useful if you can do that. We'll talk about Frankenstein both on Tuesday and Thursday, on the 30th of May and the 1st of June. Ideally, you would have finished Frankenstein in its entirety at the beginning of the week, which is Tuesday on the 30th. But again, you do the best you can. And you can see that I found a link for Frankenstein in the event that you wanted to access it online. This is when our first journal will be due on the 6th, on June 1st, the 6th one. And your first journal, Frankenstein, by that point we would have talked about how to write a journal, basically a 1-page informal response about Frankenstein, would be due by 11:59 that evening to my email via PDF. And the idea is that I can get that back to you the following week, where we are in week 3, or halfway through the semester, believe it or not, reading Persuasion by Jane Austen. Again, I was able to find a link. We'll spend 2 classes devoted to Persuasion on the 6th of June and the 8th of June. Ideally, you would have finished Persuasion in its entirety on the 6th. So as we are continuing to talk about Persuasion, you are working on our next novel. And your second journal, which would be on Persuasion, would be due on the 8th of June at 11:59 p.m. via PDF to my email. And then you can see that in week 4, this gets us into Jane Eyre. It is the longest text of the semester, so I warn you right now. It also is perhaps the most interesting text of this semester. It's certainly one of my favorites. And once again, I found the link for Jane Eyre. We'll spend the 13th and the 15th of June talking about Jane Eyre. And the 15th of June is when your first paper would be due. Certainly early papers are encouraged, as you can see here. But by that point, we would have talked about how to write a paper, and I would have given you some suggested paper topics. I suspect that you would be writing either about Frankenstein or you would be writing about Persuasion, though the story of an hour is also a possibility, that short story. But writing on a short story is a little bit different than writing on a novel. And you can see that there was no journal due for the story of an hour, or there was no journal due for the Cult of True Womanhood. I see that as sort of introductory material. And then on the 20th of June, this puts us into week 5, Emily Dickinson's poetry. Just one class devoted to Emily Dickinson's poetry. And again, I found the link where you can find some, not all, of Emily Dickinson's poems. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just to choose a poem from Emily Dickinson to talk a little bit about in our discussion forum. And that means that you don't have necessarily a journal due, but you will be getting ready for your next journal, which will be based on our next text, which we will start on the 22nd of June, which is a Thursday, and finish up on the 27th of June, which is a Tuesday. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. It's really a fascinating read. And I can tell you that once you're done with Jane Eyre, the readings are going to move much more quickly. So they are longer and perhaps a little bit more challenging at the beginning of the semester. The reward is when we get to the ending of the semester. They're much more contemporary and they are much less dense as well. So that leaves us with a final class on the 29th where we would talk about Kate Chopin once again. That happens to be Thursday, on the 29th of June, where we would talk about The Awakening, her novella, something longer than a short story, but not as long as a novel. And once again, I was able to find a link for that. That gets us into week 7, and this is our final week of the semester, where Tuesday, the 4th of July, obviously there won't be a class meeting or a class video because that's Independence Day. There's no class. But that would be the date by which I would ask you to submit in journal number 5 for The Awakening. Again, if you need a little bit of an extension, you could get a little bit of an extension, but not much, because our last class is on the 6th of July, and that happens to be Thursday, and that's when I will be posting our final exam. I will post it at 9 a.m., and you would have 24 hours to complete it and return it to me on Friday the 7th at 9 a.m. It's also the very last date that you can hand in paper number 2. Very similar to paper number 1, and early papers encouraged. So the only thing left you can see is that I've got a handout that I uploaded into syllabus and other documents folder about criteria for essay evaluation, which we can talk about as the semester progresses. But this basically gives you an overview of the class. And again, now that you've watched this video, your assignment, so to speak, is to answer the class discussion forum question. And again, you can see that at the bottom of our class today for Moodle. You can just click on that. It will take you directly to the form question, though you could also go to the discussion forum if you wanted to. And I'm just asking you to briefly introduce yourself to your classmates. Feel free to upload a video or an audio or a picture, though certainly not required. So I'll pick up next class by talking about plagiarism, and then we'll begin talking about the Cult of True Womanhood and the story of an hour. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And I will see you, so to speak, on Thursday. Take care. Bye-bye.